I was hoping you wouldn't be able to tell that I'm decidedly wet, but I have just seen myself, and yeah, you can tell that I just got caught in a downpour. Hi everyone, my name is Charlie, and today is our general Friday catch-up. I probably should just say that they're like a Friday reads, but I'm talking about my writing and other things. Today has been one of meetings. This morning, Margaret, who I did the tour of Stockport with back in June, had asked me whether we could meet to discuss possible dates for returning and doing more Stockport libraries. We don't know whether they're going to be related to the crime novels that we've written. If you didn't know, Margaret Holbrook has independently published the Jack France series, which is set in the late 1920s. And so we went around Stockport libraries for Crime Reading Month in June. We got invited back almost immediately. So we met, we started discussing what we might read. Margaret intends to have another Jack France book out by then. I probably won't have another new book out by then, just because I'm not as prolific a writer. We talk about this regularly. If I were able to develop a routine and write a set number of words per day, I think that I could be. I mean, the length of the Alice books, when I think about that, I think about if I wrote 1,000 words a day, I could probably write 6 books a year. It kind of makes me cringe a little and wish that I were a bit better than I am. So after that, I went and I visited our Macclesfield contingency of the charity shop, where I found The Land in Winter by Andrew Miller for 50p. This book has been longlisted for the Booker Prize. I was glad of this because it was 50p from that charity shop, and it was £1 reservation at the library. So I just saved myself 50p and I own it. So I don't know. I'm hoping it's good now. Because so far, the books that I have been reading for the Booker Prize, or from the Booker Prize long list, I haven't enjoyed. So last week I had read Universality, and since then I have read Audition by Kitamura. People have described this book as odd. I was auto-approved for this book on NetGalley ages ago, and a lot of people have been talking about it. I didn't really know what it was about. I kind of steer clear of anything to do with popular books nowadays. It's just not where my reading is. And yeah, I had it there. And so when it was longlisted, I decided that's one of the ones that I would read, as I already had it, as opposed to Charlie, who didn't. This book begins with an unnamed narrator meeting somebody for coffee, and it's a case of, or is she meeting them at a restaurant? Wherever they're meeting, you don't know whether it's the beginning of an affair, what it is. Then this young man says something, and she says, well, that can't possibly be true. And you follow them for about 50% of the novel. And then the next 50%, the character is now more closely related to her. You've gone back to the restaurant where there's more of a family, and everybody has different relationships to one another than they had in the first part. And it's very discombobulating, and the reader's left wondering, well, what's happened? And then you realise it's supposed to be almost like a sequel to the first part if everybody's relationships were different with one another than they had been in the first part. There's almost something of the meta-narrative going on there, because in the first part they've been discussing a play that the main character was part of, and how there was a scene where the writer didn't know how to get between those two scenes, but the character in the second part was completely different from the character in the first part, and so the narrator just had to bridge that gap as an actress. And it's almost like sliding doors. I was reminded of Life After Life. If Rachel Cusk had written Life After Life, there's a lot of nasal gazing and pseudo-philosophizing, and it just felt incredibly bloated and unnecessary. And if there'd been anything interesting there in this idea of these are the same characters, but they're now in different relationships and they know each other in a different fashion than they did in the first part, that would have been fine. But as I say, like, so many writers have done this idea of characters becoming more self-aware of who they are in terms of the novel and worrying about not being their true self. Read it and I was thinking of The Comforters by Muriel Spark, where the main character recognises she's in a novel. Like I say, I was thinking of Life After Life. Even Human Croquet by Kate Atkinson, both of them play with this idea of characters being different than they were despite being the same person. So it just felt like a really pretentious take on stuff that's been done before, and as though the writer was saying, look at me, I'm doing something completely new, and it wasn't, and it felt derivative and just bad. Because I think there's this tendency in fiction nowadays to enter into the minds of people and just let them ramble and ramble about nothing, and there's no action taking place in this book. So it felt like, why did you need to be, what is it, just, is it 208 pages, this book? It felt too long. It felt like everything that was said in here could have been said in a short story. It felt unnecessary. So that's like 2 for 2 of books from the Booker Prize that I've been reading where I felt like, why? Why did the judges choose these 2 very subpar books, Universality by Natasha Brown and Audition by Katie Kitamura? Is it because there's a liking of navel-gazing in books nowadays? Do people like very self-indulgent prose, very selfish characters? I don't know, but I didn't like it. However, prior to reading that, after having a bad experience with Universality and not really knowing what to read next, I read The Black Friar by S.G. MacLean. This was lent to me by my next door neighbour a few weeks ago, maybe even last month. We got to talking about our liking of crime fiction, and she was saying how she never thought she'd like historical crime fiction, and then her son gave her one and now she likes them. And this is the second in the Seeker series. I haven't read the first, and because I was too lazy to move on Sunday, just like, oh well, I'll have a look at that because this was next to me on the table where I was sat. I read this entire 450-page book in a day. I was utterly gripped by it. This book is set during the time of Oliver Cromwell, and Seeker is one of his agents. So you have Seeker, who is in a world which feels completely tense because you have people who had hoped that Charles I would win and are trying to get Charles II back from France on the throne, the royalists. You have this religious cult who aren't happy with the way that Oliver Cromwell is ruling over England, and so they want to knock him off the throne, and in the expectation that Jesus will return. And then you have Seeker having to deal with all of this, and he is investigating the crime after one of the spies who works in the same organisation as he is has been found killed by being bricked up behind a wall, and Seeker is tasked with investigating who this killer was. But that doesn't really seem to be what the book is about. The book really brings to life how difficult a time it was. I feel like if you were a fan of Game of Thrones or any of those epic fantasy series that deal very much with the politics of the fantastical world, then you'll enjoy this. I feel like it's a great entry point for fantasy readers into the crime genre because of that historical element and because everyone feels very morally grey. And it didn't feel much like a murder mystery either, because of the fact that Seeker is going and he's asking questions, but it felt very much like a modern thriller set in this, like I say, the time of Cromwell. Because the author is very knowledgeable about this time period, everything felt more real. And I also liked Seeker as a character because I feel like we wouldn't necessarily get on. I think our beliefs are very far apart from one another. I did like that he was a Yorkshireman stuck in London. That almost worked really well as well because it gives him this sense of being an outcast, not just because of where he's come from, but because of the fact that he's so far removed from the north in London. And London is much more cosmopolitan. It's full of, not waifs and strays, but it's full of different type of people. You know, it's very close to France, and there's, you know, not really, but it's close to France in the way that people are sharing tales of what's going on with Charles II over there. I was thrilled by all the double crossing going on by the characters who, like, you could feel for them. You felt like they might be villains, but you could also understand their motives, but you'd also feel like some sort of emotional thing for them. Yeah, I was so impressed by this book that when I went to town today, I picked up the next one from the library. And I didn't necessarily want to get this hardcover, but I have such a hope that this is going to have that thrilling adventure feel that this one did, and I am here for it. I have avoided historical crime fiction for a long time because I just didn't think that it was for me, and now I'm beginning to think that maybe there is something there. You know, like Shard Lake, I ignored that. I did pick up Blood and Sugar by, is it Laura Shepherd Robinson, and another book whose title I can't remember, but in that one it said that it was more suited to reading on a winter night, so I'm saving that for later in the year. Writing wise, I have actually been getting some writing done. I've been writing every evening and writing a longhand, and I feel like if I write longhand it reduces my stresses. It does mean that I don't necessarily get as many words on the page as I had hoped, and it does slow down production a little bit, but the fact that I'm actually writing and have written every single day since I last saw you has felt like a bit of a relief. I'm still not hitting the 1,000 word mark every day, but that's simply because I write maybe about 1 to 2 pages in this notebook, close the notebook, and then generally fall asleep. Or sometimes I fall asleep while still writing and then read the sentence and think, I don't know how that was going to end. Let's move on. I've also been thinking a lot about the second poetry collection this week, just because a poet friend of mine has announced another collection and they got to talking about how they go about producing a collection, and it's sometimes they'll have had poems for decades that haven't fit into their previous collections, but now they're getting their chance in the sun. And so I've been wondering, when it comes to the next poetry collection, about going through, seeing which ones work and removing any that don't. Anyway, I think people are home, my dog's going mad, so I'm going to go. If you want to talk about anything I've talked about in this video, then please feel free to do so in the comments. I hope that you have enjoyed this video, because until next time, that is all.